So Dee made a good point here. He said in our hello and goodbye, our callback function has these parameters. How come when we invoke the object, don't we need to pass those parameters in? Request, response, and next. The reason is those parameters are built, they're not self-defined. We didn't create those request, response, and next parameters. Those are built into connect. When it's a connect function, it automatically has those parameters. So connect automatically, implicitly passes those parameters. We don't explicitly have to do it. Okay, those parameters are built into the connect callbacks. That's why. In your function, it's a custom defined function. So those parameters you've defined, so Node doesn't know how to interpret those parameters. When we use connect, it understands implicitly. It's a very good question. Thank you for raising it. Okay, so now I want to look at Express. So this whole process of kind of routing was called mounting. So it allows us to determine what request path was made and then what do we want to do based on that request. And that we use that app.use for doing that process. Okay. So I'll put these slides up because it just has some additional explanation, and you can go back. I'll put this PowerPoint up on Blackboard if you want to look at these notes later on for future reference. They're here for you. Okay. So we want to start looking at Express. So Express is a framework commonly used with Node. It basically sits on top of Connect. It extends Connect's functionality. So it does what Connect allows us to do, but it does a whole lot more. Okay? So we'll start off with a really simple Express example. Then we're going to use a tool called the Express Generator, which is another NPM package. The Express Generator is cool because it basically builds out an entire application scaffold, builds out all the folders we need, and then we can just work from there. So moving forward, every application we build, we may as well just use the Express Generator because it builds out a nice application that we can then customize. And one of the things it also includes is a templating engine. There are several different templating engines available, and we're going to use one called EJS, which is not actually the Express default. So what we want to do is create our first Express application. So I'm gonna stop my server. So I'm gonna go into week 4. Actually, I'm gonna go back to Node. I'm gonna create a new folder. We'll make a new application. We'll call this Express Simple Demo. So we're going to do an Express, a single-page Express application. It'll look similar to our Connect version of our application, but you'll notice a few differences. So we'll build this as a one-page app, and then we'll build a separate app, which will use the Express Generator. So I'll create a blank file called Express Simple Demo. And in my command prompt, I'll just change my directories and go into Express Simple Demo. So we've got a blank directory. Express is an NPM package. So in order to install Express here, we're going to need to first initialize. Actually, we installed NPM globally, but it's a good idea to call NPM init. Let's initialize NPM in here so we have a package.json. So I'll run the command npm init in here. And I'll accept all of the defaults for my package.json. And we can see it automatically created in our new folder. So we just have a simple package.json. Robert?
When you write npm init, is there something you can add to that that'll just give you the defaults? I remember reading that somewhere.
I think there is.
That way you don't have to sit there.
I'd have to check. I think there is. I don't know off the top of my head, but I suspect that you're right. Okay. So now we want to install Express. So I'm just going to open up the Express.js homepage for a minute. So Express.js.com. So they've suggested to install Express, we do npm install express -- save. So let's run that command here to install Express. Npm install Express. And we'll just build a very simple one-page hello world using Express. It'll be similar to what we did with Connect, but you'll notice a few differences.
Sorry, Rich, could you just show that? I can't remember how to bring up the generate the package.json file.
You just need to run the command npm init, initialize package manager in this folder. And then just hit enter all the way through until you're done. So we'll install Express. Locally. So it created a node modules folder, and inside of node modules we'll see the Express package. So here's Express. And notice Express has its own node modules because Express has a whole bunch of dependencies on other npm packages, a whole lot of them. And some of these may also have subdependencies. Okay? So we don't have to worry about it. Express handles all of that. npm handles not only installing what we want, but any subsequent dependencies npm does for us. So now we're going to create a server.js. It looks similar to what we did, but this time, we don't need to use Connect because we're using Express, and Express sits on top of Connect. So we're going to create a new Express application. We're going to listen on port 3000. There's really only few things that are different from our Connect version. Notice in app.use, we've just directly wrapped our callback function. So at /star, so at our root, we want to send back hello world. We also have this line down at the bottom, module.exports. Basically what this line does is make this file public, make it globally available to other parts of our application. Without it, this file is private, and anything in here can't be seen by any other file. So let's go ahead. We'll make a new file. I'll immediately save it in my Express simple demo. We'll call it server.js. And this code sample, this is straight from the Express homepage. Okay. So if I click on Getting Started and Hello World, here's pretty much the same code sample. In fact, we can follow this if we want. So we'll connect to Express. So we'll require the Express package, and we'll create the new Express app. Just create a variable called app. So we're instantiating a new application of type Express. Pretty much everything we do moving forward in this class will be an Express app. So we'll use this over and over again. Or if we see it here. So we don't need the new keyword because this is JavaScript, not Java. So now we want to handle requests at the root URL. Now, our application can handle different types of requests. By default, what's the default HTTP request method? Think about if you build an HTML form and you don't specify the method, what method runs by default for all HTTP requests? We saw it, remember we first built our connect, but before we specified any response, what did it say? Yeah, it said cannot get. So get's still the default HTTP method. So if we want to handle a get request at our root, Now our next parameter is optional. We just want to use, in this case, response. So they use response.send. And we'll just send hello world. Now when we built this out as a regular node file, we also needed to call response.end. And we use response.write and end. Otherwise it never terminated. With Express, the command, we don't need to call response.end. The command will terminate. Express will and connect handle that for us. We'll listen on port 3000. And let's log. Now, we could make this public by using the module exports. We don't really need to in this case because there are no other files. This is a one-page, one-file application. There are no other files that need to see this code. This is the only file in the application. So if a GET request comes in at our root folder, we should send back this response. Let's try this out and just make sure hello world runs if we load the application and try to load localhost 3000 in our browser. So it's similar code to what we did with our connect file. Not exactly the same, but it's leveraging connect. So I'll go to my command prompt, just type node server.js. Whoops. I missed something here. Close. I think we want it to be a function. We want a callback function here. We're going to log that inside. So we'll create a server listening on port 3000, and when this starts, we'll log that message to our console. Oops. I'll try that again. So now our application's running. It logs to the console. We should be able to open our browser and browse to localhost 3000 and get a hello world message. Just shrink my browser down a bit. So now if I go to localhost 3000, I don't specify any particular URL, we get hello world. What will happen if I go somewhere else? What do we think will happen? We've only mapped requests to our root, right? Any other URL requests that come in, we haven't handled. We haven't told the server what to do. So let's add another one. Let's say app.get. Maybe we're going to build a page that will run at localhost 3000/login. Now I didn't Should have used nodemon. We've changed the file, but now my app is still running. It's not restarting. So I probably should stop it and restart it with nodemon. Might be a good idea. So I'm going to stop it. This time, I'll restart using nodemon. Now we should be able to also go to localhost 3000/login and get a different message. Right? So it runs. Oops. Sorry, I'll try and keep my... So goodbye still doesn't work. Hello world loads at the root. Login, we've now mapped that URL request, so any requests that come in at /login, we've told the server knows what to do. We're going to send this response. Let's try this. So this will handle a GET request. So what if we want to show a form here? Let's add a little bit of HTML. Why don't we just add a form with a submit button? And then look at how would we handle that. Okay. Everybody with me so far? So after this, let's try a little bit of HTML. Form method equals, we should probably escape the characters. Post input type equals submit. I may have to escape more characters. We'll see if nodemon is happy. It says we're okay. So when we get a GET request at /login, we want to show this message and include a form. Now, we're not really going to hard code our HTML in here. What we're going to do is load a page instead, ultimately, is what we'll want to do. We don't need to print the HTML from here. We'll already have the HTML in a file, and we'll just load that file. I will show you. Yep, we're getting there. So now, right, when we reload login, it gets a form. What's going to happen when I click the submit button? And why?
It says cannot post.
Okay. Why do we get this message? And how do we fix it?
So it can't actually like send the submit to anything?
Yeah, well, it submits to itself, right? If we don't specify an action, by default, an HTML page will post to the same URL, right? If we wanted to go to a different URL, we'd specify the action in our form tag. We didn't specify, so it's now doing a post to /login. So why do we get the message saying cannot post?
There's nothing in the code listening for a response.
Exactly. Our server is only checking for a GET request at login or a GET request at the root. So what would we have to do in order to also handle that form submission? We're going to need to add some more code in here.
App.post or app.request
Yeah.
or response.
So if there's a GET request, so now we need to process the form if it has been submitted. So instead of app.get, we need app.post at what URL are we checking? Yeah, at login. So it's the same URL, but we have two different types of HTTP requests that could come in at that URL. Get, show the form. Post means the user already filled it out. So we don't want to show the form again. We want to process it. So in this case, we want to send a different message. We don't want to display the form. We're going to show the user a different message. Right? So if this was a contact form, up here we would load a view that shows our form at get, and at post we would parse the response and send an email. So if I save those changes, NodeMon restarts. So now our application knows how to process both the get and the post at that URL. So now we can still run our get request. And now if we post, we can handle that. So our code is really nice and modular now. We can read the same URL, but we can handle different types of requests differently. We no longer have to send the user off to a different page on our form. We can keep them at that URL. Notice the URL doesn't change. It's /login both times. But we're doing two different things. Now, we haven't written the different views, just showing you how Express works and how it handles the routing and dispatching of the URLs. Anybody have any questions so far about what's going on here? Does it make sense to you? So what we want to do, the last thing I want to do, so this was a really simple example using Express. What we're going to do is actually use the Express generator, because not only does it pre-build that app.js file with a bunch of stuff for us, but it also sets up an entire application folder structure. Makes it really easy for us to organize. So this is what you need to do for your assignment. Okay? So let's run this, and then I'm going to show you a sample. I spent most of my weekend building a portfolio using Node to show you guys what I'm sort of expecting, and we can have a look at it. Okay? So I'm going to stop this one. We're done with that single page application. Okay? I'm going to just go up one level back to my root node folder. So I'm just going to stop my application, and I'm going to go back to my node folder. I want to use the Express generator. So I'm going to follow this command. So we're just in my root node folder. So I'm going to type npm install Express generator -g. So this is global, so we don't have to keep installing it. So as you make new apps every week, you don't have to install Express generator over and over again. We're just install it once, and then it's installed on the machine. So I'll run that. It installs it the same place that NodeMon was installed globally, into app data roaming profile, right, into node modules. So now I can use Express generator to build out as many applications as I want. So the next thing we want to do in a minute, don't do it yet, we'll want to type the command Express, and there's a whole bunch of options here. Now in the sample they give, they create an application called my app, and they do that by typing the command Express my app. we're going to do something similar, but notice, so when you do that, Express will create, don't do it yet because we're going to make one change. Express will build all this stuff for you. It automatically builds the package.json for you. We don't have to go through that little wizard anymore. It builds app.js, which is our application starting point. It builds out public folders with JavaScript, images. It creates a couple of routes. It creates a style sheet. And it creates a few views. And notice these views have Jade extensions. Jade is the default templating engine for doing our HTML pages. So if we just create an application with Express, our templates will use Jade. We're going to change something in the configuration because instead of Jade, we're going to use a different templating engine called EJS. Now, there's pros and cons. The reason why we're going to use EJS is simply it's going to look more familiar to you guys coming from PHP. Okay? Jade, in a way, is faster. It's more lightweight. Personally, I prefer Jade. But Jade can be confusing unless you have a really, really good handle on HTML. So Tom and I agreed, and if you've got a copy of the textbook and you're working along with the book, they're using EJS in the book. We think it's more familiar, so we're going to use it, EJS instead. So if we want to install an Express app with EJS, we have to add this -e when we do the install. If we don't add that, we're going to get Jade as the templating engine. So I'm going to type the command Express -e, and I'm going to call this, so I'm building a new application. I already have one called Lesson 4. I think I'll call this Lesson 4 Express. That'll be the name of my application. And I'm going to make sure I've got -e so that it uses EJS as our HTML template engine. Doesn't matter what you call your application, really. So it built, created a Lesson 4 Express folder, and then it created all this stuff in here. This is why the generator's cool. So if I go back, here's my Lesson 4 Express. So it created all of these files for me. I've got package.json with a bunch of dependencies. It says we're using EJS for templating. So public is used. By default, all our images, JavaScript, CSS can go here. We've got views. It builds out 2 default views. We'll look at these in a minute, and then we'll build some of our own. So they've got EJS extensions. It also has routes. One of the questions I got this morning, one of the students in the other section, he went ahead and already tried using the Express generator. And he said, I understand it builds this structure. He said, but this MVC model view controller structure we talked about in week 1, but where are the controllers? I see views. So here are our HTML templates. Why don't we have controllers? The Express generator, it doesn't like the word controllers. It uses the word routes instead. So routes and controllers are the same thing. If we go back to our MVC model from week 1, actually I'm already here. We talked about MVC patterns, right? So the controller we said was the logic. It did all the logic between the database models and the user interface. So when we use the Express generator, by default, those files are called routes instead. If you don't like that, you can change it if you want it to be logic or controllers or something else. But I'm just going to leave the defaults that the generator builds. Keep it simple. Okay. So any logic files we build will go inside of routes. And by default, it gives us 2. We'll open these up shortly and look at what's in them. And then we've got our views here. So I built out my own version. I used the Express generator, and I built a portfolio. Okay. So it's pretty similar. It's got app.js. It's got package.json. It's got 2 routes. But I made all these different views, right? Because we said your portfolio needs to have a home page, an about page, a projects, a services, and contact. Okay. So I created separate EJS files, separate views for each one. I've got in my public, I've got images, style sheets. Node looks in here for a favorite icon. If you want to include one, you just put it in public. So here's what the portfolio looks like. So I use the generator. Here's home. I just used Bootstrap for CSS. We'll do that before the end of class today. We played with Bootstrap last week. So now that we've got Express building it, we can add Bootstrap in to do our CSS. So I used Express. When I click on About, you'll notice the URLs. It's a little bit slow. So my URL, so I wrote a get handler for About. When the user makes a request at my URL/get, it's going to load the About EJS template. That would be this one right here. So I built a projects template, which is coming out a little wonky at this resolution, services, and I made a contact form. And just like we did in our Express example, there's two versions of the contact request, right? There's a GET request that loads the form, and there's a POST request that will process the form inputs, check my CAPTCHA, and send me an email if you fill it out. So there's basically, I've got 5 pages. I have 6 route handlers in my routing. 5 GET requests at my route, about, project, service, contact, and 1 POST request for the form. So this is kind of what we're looking for, what we want you to show when you're out job hunting. And I would strongly recommend you include things like your LinkedIn page or GitHub. Put those on here. And I've made a shared header and shared footer. I'll show you how to do that today. It's really the same as we do it in PHP. Make a header file and link it in. Make a footer file, link it in. So there's no database. We'll get to the database next week. So building this with the generator is real easy. Use the generator to build a new one. Create a few views and use the routing to tell Express which page to load based on the URL. Add your CSS and you're done. So let's build out, let's launch. We go back to the Express generator. So we've done this. It's created everything. The next thing we have to do is go into our application directory now at the command prompt. And it even tells us right here in the command prompt, okay, type in cd lesson 4 Express, or whatever you called your application. If you gave it a different name, put in that name. And now we want to run npm install. So do a base install of npm in here. It'll chug away for a minute. So it's installed a few modules here. And now, if we just type npm start, this should start our Express application. And notice the starting location. It points to node bin www. Let's look at why. Just open the folder. So I'll open that folder. So notice package.json that the generator built. It says use node to start, and the compiled source code, it actually compiles all our code and puts it in this folder, bin www. You'll get used to this, and when you do enterprise computing with Tom in January, you'll notice when we do ASP.NET, it also, the code is compiled and held in a bin folder. So if I go to, here's our bin. We don't change this file, the node compiler generates it. So now our app is running. Now we didn't use nodemon. We'll change it, let's see if it runs, and then we'll add nodemon in. So now if we go back to localhost 3000, at the root, where's this page coming from? We didn't build it. If I go, let's say hello, how come this loads? Yeah, which view is loading? You got it, right? The generator, it built 2 views for us, right? Here's our view folder. Automatically, when we use the generator, it gives us 2 default views, index.ejs and an error.ejs. So we could load that. Well, let's see what happens if we load error. May not load. We haven't set up a handler for it yet. So let's look at, well, what the heck do these EJS views look like anyway? So if I go into views and open up index.ejs, here's the HTML. So Express pre-builds this for us. So this is great. When you use the generator build your portfolio, it already will give you a home page, which we can now change however we like. What do you suppose, where is this title coming from? And what are these tags, which shouldn't look too unfamiliar? What's going on there? We see that 3 times.
Is it a message code referring to another file?
Yep. So it prints out 3 times, right? It prints out Express here, it prints out Express in the heading, and it prints it out in the welcome message. Where do you suppose this value is coming from? Let's say we wanted to change it. So let's go back here for a second. Here's our view. Where would what's controlling or populating or talking to our view? Yeah, the controller or the root. So we've got a view called index. Where do you suppose we could find the logic file that is passing in a title and loading this page? So let's open up roots. Here's index.js. Now it should be really clear. Right? It's similar to what we did before. We're requiring Express. This time we're using a router, so Express has its own routing mechanism. So instead of calling app.get, we say router, handle a get request here. In our page we did previously, right, in app.js before, we were just doing a response.send. We were sending raw HTML. We don't need to do that with the generator. We don't want to spit out the HTML here. We want to load a web page. So instead we use the render method. This renders our index.ejs file. We could put the extension on here, but we don't need to. We've already said EJS is the templating engine, so we can leave the extension off. So now let's come to the title, and then I'll take your question. Where does the title come from? Remember, our title shows up here 3 times. Yeah. Yeah, so right here, we're saying load the index page and pass it a variable called a title that we're giving a value of Express. So what would we have to do if we want to change the title from Express to something else?
Just change it right there.
Yeah, we'll just change the value of this variable. So let's make it first Express generator site.
On every link that you click on some website, let's say you're on the home page and then you click on contact, the title changes along with that page name.
We're going to do that. Great question. Remind me if we don't get to it, because I want to come and do that in a minute. Okay. So now I didn't use NodeMon. My application hasn't restarted. I should have used NodeMon. If I refresh, there's no changes. So what I want to do here, I'm going to stop the application. I'm going to change the configuration to use NodeMon instead. Saves us time. So I'll hit Control-C, terminate my server. To use NodeMon instead, if we open up package.json, right here, it's starting using the base node process. Well, node doesn't restart. So if we just change node to NodeMon in package.json and restart it, now it should be running with NodeMon. So we can continually make changes without restarting. So now I'll just run the npm start command again. It restarts, NodeMon's running. Now I refresh, and now we've changed our title. So this is how we pass. We just pass an object to our page. Now, we've reused that same variable 3 times, and we should probably take a careful look at the syntax, right? Very similar to PHP tags, except we're using a % instead of a question mark. Obviously, we don't have the word PHP. Notice also we have an equal sign here. What do you suppose the equal sign is doing? Kyle?
Does it go at the start of each reference so you can have multiples?
Good guess. It's actually doing something else. I'll take it out and save my change. Remember, I've got NodeMon running, so I don't need to refresh to restart. So I've taken it out, the equal sign. I took it out here of my heading. I still have it at the top. I still have it in my paragraph. Heading went away without that equal sign. So what do you think the equal sign does? Why do I need the equal sign in order for that value to get displayed?
Tell it to expect an object after that?
You're close. It's even simpler than that. How would you print out a PHP variable to the screen? Yeah, it's basically the equivalent of a PHP echo command. That equal sign is shorthand for display or print. Okay? When I took the equals away, my H1 tag is still here. Whoops. If we view the source, I still have an H1 tag, but there's nothing inside it because I turned off the printout.
So would technically still be the value there, it's just not displaying?
No, there's nothing there. Now, we've used this title variable. What if I want the title here and here, but instead here we want a different message? So we want to say something like, now we've got 2 different server-side variables being displayed. What would we have to do in our root file? If I save this right now and refresh, what do you think will happen? So Node, I like this, right? If this was PHP, the page would have loaded, but message would just be blank, right? In Node, our view can't use a variable that we haven't declared in the root. The view doesn't know what message is, so it crashes. So if we want that, how can we also, we still want the title to get passed from here to the view. How do we also pass a message? We don't even actually need another object. We can do it in the same object. So we can just do it this way. So now when we're calling our page, we're passing in a second key called message and a different value. So maybe the data we're passing back is a record from the database, right? We can pass it in as an object or pass in the individual fields of that database record. If I refresh this, whoops. If I refresh this now it knows, right? So it prints title here, it prints message here.
Where did you tell it to decide? Just different heading.
Now, one other thing you need to note, those values, those variables, they're case sensitive. Okay? If I spell it message here, and in my view, I use a capital, message with capital not defined. So be consistent with your casing. I'll generally use camel case for my variables. Okay? Again, PHP wouldn't crash. We just wouldn't get any message value. It would just be blank. So we need to be careful that we're following our case. Okay. If I can refresh. Now, so that's index. That's at our root folder, right? With no URL specified, we want to load our index view and all the HTML that's in there. We also have the generator built out, users.js. And sorry, I guess I should mention. So this line is what makes it public. This is what allows the view to be able to see this function and allows app.js to know what's happening. I'm going to open up app.js. I probably should have done this. So notice here, it requires a whole bunch of dependencies. So we're requiring our two controller files. And then we're calling app.use. So when we get a request at the root, we're going to use this root. If we get requests at /users, we're going to use our users.js, which it also built for us.
So the app.js file is the file that the server is running?
Yeah, it's the site.
Calls.
You got it. App.js is kind of the base file, and then from there it dispatches based on the routing we set up. So we have a users.js. You know, if I go to like /hello, there's no routing set up here, so we get a 404. I should be able to go to /users though, because that's set up in app.js. Now I can go here, I don't get a 404, I get this funky message instead. Well, let's take a look at why. If we open up users.js, it has a get handler running at /users, but notice it's not rendering or not loading any view. It's just printing a message back to the browser, which in a real application, we don't want to do this. We need to load something, even if what we're loading is an error page. Okay. And in fact, we have an error page, so we can either load this one, or let's build a quick users.ejs view, and then we'll modify. So let's modify this. Let's comment this out in users.js. And we'll load a users view instead. So we'll call res.render users. We haven't built this view yet, so now we need to build it, right? Actually, I'll try it like this. So we're going to tell it when a request comes in at /users, load the view called users.ejs. Well, we don't have that view yet. So if I try and refresh this, we won't get our respond with a resource. We've commented that out. So now it's trying, saying, hey, yeah, I'm trying to load the view called users that should be in the directory called views, but there isn't one. So we need to quickly create one. So let's make a new file. We'll make a simple HTML template. For now, we'll just put in some static text, just a heading that says users. So I want to save this file as users.ejs, and I want to save it inside my views directory. That's where Express will look for it. So I'll save it in views. So now if I go back to the browser and refresh my request at localhost /users, it should load this page. Sorry, I'm trying. So now if we refresh, it loads our page. So you should be getting a sense of how you'll build your 5 pages for your portfolio. You'll build 5 EJS views. And you'll have to write a GET request for each one. Now, we don't need to write a separate root file for every page. We can do all of it right within index. The reason that we might have separate root files, let's say we were building something like Blackboard in Node, right? We're managing all different types of data. We'll have students, instructors, courses, and we'll probably have create, read, update, delete functions for all of those. So what in that case I would do is I'd write a students.js root that had all of the functions for creating, reading, updating, deleting students. For instructors, I'd have an instructors.js file that had all those functions, rather than putting them all in one root. This way we can modularize our code. You know, me and Janelle, we can work together. You do student, I'll do instructors. So I'll make my own root file, you make your own. We're not working in the same file. Okay. For your portfolio, you really only need index.js. And I'll show you how to use index.js to load different views, depending on the URL. Everybody with me so far?
What was the res.render code?
Res.render simply tells the server what view to load if we get a request, this type of request at this URL. Now, this page is static. I want to pass a list of users from, let's say we got a list of users and we want to pass it and output that list in our view. So we'll create a user list. I'll create it as an array, me, you, and them. We want to, on our view, we want to take that list and we want to loop through and we want to print it all out. So how can we pass this data when we load our view? How can we pass that data to it? Yeah, so same way we passed the title and message on our home page. We just passed it, created one JavaScript object, and we can pass that in. So our second parameter, our optional parameter of res.render, yeah, this is the view we're loading. That's always going to be the first parameter. But is there any information we want to pass from the root into it? So we'll just open a set of curly braces. And we're going to pass our user list in. Now, here I've used the same name. Some people like this and some people don't like it. They find it confusing. So it's important. The value in purple, this is what our variable name is going to be called in our view. So there's our key, our value. This represents the variable up here. If you find this confusing and you want to use two different names here, that's fine. I'm going to use the same name. So now when we load our users view, our user list array is now available. So now on our view, we're going to want to print out a simple list in a loop so we can output each value. Now Node, the EJS doesn't have a for each loop, which bugs me. It's one of the reasons I'm not a giant EJS fan. But we can just use a general for loop. We can loop through this array and we can output our user list. So let's do that. Won't take us long. So let's open up users.ejs. Let's add an unordered list. And now we can add a for loop. So we'll start at 0. It knows, our view knows what user length is because user length is being passed in. We'll open a curly brace. And then I'm going to close the tag so we can output some HTML. This syntax is a little messy, but it's kind of like PHP. Now we'll need to use the equal sign, right? We want to display user list I. and then we'll close our curly brace. So this should loop through our user list array and create a new item with each name. Again, make sure we've got the equal sign. Without the equal sign, you'll just get 3 dots on the page. Your loop will still run 3 times, but nothing will get printed into each line. That equal sign is critical to actually display the value. So now if we refresh users, we've passed those values from our root to our view, and we can loop through. So creating your views for your portfolio, it should be really easy because the content is static. You don't even need to pass anything from the root. You're just basically making pages, and you can hard code your content in here. It's just HTML. You don't have to have dynamic content coming from the root to the view. You just have to have the root loading the proper view. So let's make one more page and do that, and then we'll build a really simple nav bar, and I'll show you how to add Bootstrap. We only need another 5 minutes to do it. Tyler, do you have a question?
I was just going to ask you wanted 2 parts for assignment?
Pardon?
You wanted our assignment done in 2 parts. What did you want us to do for part 1?
For part 1, all I want to see is that you've built a portfolio application using the Express generator, and you've been working on it and committing it to GitHub. And I don't want to see 1 commit at 11:55 next Wednesday night. Okay, that's not going to get you the 20%. We said that you had to deploy it to the cloud as well, but I thought we'd have time to walk through that today, and we don't. So I'm going to eliminate that requirement for part 1. We'll start next week with me showing you how to deploy it to the cloud. So all I want to see is that you've built an Express generator app and you're working on it, that there's multiple commits. So all I need is the GitHub repo link for next Wednesday. Okay? So creating this is easy. Let's create, we still have a bit of time, let's create one more page and another root handler. We'll build a simple nav bar and we'll throw Bootstrap in. We only have 7 minutes, that's enough time. Okay. So I'm going to create a new view. Think what I'll do here, I'm just going to copy this for a minute. I'll copy my user's EJS. I'll click on new. I'll paste it in. I'll put in a title of, let's say, about. We won't put in any dynamic content. So this is just an HTML view only, which is basically what you have to do in the portfolio. I'm going to save this one as about.ejs. Now we have a couple choices. We can build a separate about.js root. We really don't need to. We can just use index.js to say if any what URL should load this page. Yeah, if we get a GET request at localhost /about, let's render this view. So this page can say anything you want, it doesn't really matter. So I'll go to index. Somebody mind closing the door, please? And I'll mark in my comment that this is a GET request. So we'll use our Express router. We'll call GET. And this time the URL we want it to dispatch is /about. What should happen in our router.get when the URL is /about? What do we want to do? Kyle? Yeah, well, we're not passing anything, so we'll just call res.render about. If we wanted to pass some dynamic values, that's fine. We can just create a JavaScript object, pass in any key and any sets of keys and values. So if we go back and refresh, there's our page. So you've got to build 5 views, and in index.js you need 5 get handlers for the 5 different URLs. Okay, if I want to add more pages, I would write the get handlers here. The last thing I want to do, because it's a requirement for your assignment, is show you quickly how we could make a shared header. Let's say we want a header with 3 links: home, about, and users. And we want to share that as an include file like we would do in PHP. Okay. We'll make a new view. So you know what, I'm going to go to my index page. I'm going to take everything here from the body up, kind of like we did in PHP. Let's copy that, all that code. And I'll make a new. Now, I could leave this as title, but that means on all of our other pages, we need to make sure we're passing in a title, right? So we either have to pass in a title, or we could hard code in for today, you know, lesson 4. They'll all just get the same title. Keep it simple. Okay. Now, I'm going to save this in views. Now, this is a shared view, so I'm actually going to put it in a subfolder. I'm going to call this, these are known in Node speak as partials. So it's not a complete page, it's a part of a page, and we're sharing it. So I'm going to create a folder called partials, and I'll save this one as header.ejs. Okay. So now in my index, users, and about, I want to replace this code at the top. So in my index, I'm going to take that out, and instead we can use include partials header.ejs. Pretty similar to what you do with using include in PHP, right? Except it's not a function with parameters. Now, we didn't add any links to it. We should probably just add links. So if we view the full page, it still just looks like a normal web page. We get our title from the header file, style sheet link from the header file. So let's add this into the top of our other 2 pages, right? So everything from the body up. So in users, let's take everything out and include our header. And in about, let's take everything out from the body up and include our header. The last thing we should do in the header is we should add 3 links. And then every page will share that header. Now we can navigate from one page to the next. So in the body, I'm not going to style this at all. We'll just make a nav with 3 links. So our first link just goes to slash. We don't even have to specify a page name, just the root. That will load index. We're almost done. Thanks for your patience. So now if I save that header, we didn't style it, but now we've got our nav bar. It's shared. Right? So we can go anywhere. So you'll need to do this in your portfolio. We looked last week at using Bootstrap for navigation. So if we wanted to add Bootstrap, those links are on Blackboard, right? I could just paste them right into my header file. In fact, I'll do that and we'll notice the design will change. If I go back to Blackboard, and go into my week 3 folder. I'll be done in 1 second. This is the last thing I'm going to do. I'm just going to copy my Bootstrap CSS and jQuery links. I'll get rid of the default style sheet Express gives me. I'll go with Bootstrap instead. And now if I refresh, notice the CSS changed because now it's using Bootstrap. So I didn't apply the nav classes like we did last week, but that's easy enough to do. You already have the example from last week. So we'll build a header. You should build a header, and you should build a footer as well. So I will put all this code up on GitHub. I'll create a repository for week 4 so you can see what we've done. And I want you to start working on and building, use the Express generator to start working on your portfolio and be committing to GitHub as you're working. Okay? Use NodeMon because it will save you time as you're working. Be making regular commits to Git, and by next Wednesday night, submit your GitHub repository link on Blackboard so that we can see that you've been working on the portfolio. You have a working Express generator site.
It's due the week after?
It's due in 2 weeks. Yeah, so the start of class, be on time next week. What I want to show you next week is how to deploy it either to Heroku or to Azure. Okay? I've actually put a demo on Azure already. So I sent out for some instructions, thanks to Brad, of how you get your Azure Student Pack. So you guys already have that in an email. You gotta kind of walk through it carefully. And there's a video walkthrough here of creating an Express site and deploying it to Azure. So there's a 3-minute video walkthrough, as well as a tutorial step by step. So if you want to try getting your stuff on Azure before next week, I would strongly recommend you do. At least get your Azure account set up. The instructions are in the email I sent you. I'll also show you how you can deploy from Heroku. They're both free to you. You can basically put your code on GitHub, and then you can just attach it. So you can deploy directly from your account. So here I can deploy directly from GitHub. You just attach it to a Git repository, and it will actually automatically update. So every time I push to GitHub, it redeploys to the cloud. We'll do this to start a class next week, so let's be on time. And then next week, we'll also start working on getting our applications to talk to a NoSQL database. Okay? That's it for